to this live SOC debate featuring two security operations heavyweights. We've got Carson Zimmerman from Microsoft in the blue corner, and we've got Anton Chuvakin from Google in the red corner. Again, thank you all for joining us. I have to say that the response to this debate has literally blown our minds. We have over 1,000 people registered, and we guarantee a lively debate that will cover the latest and greatest security operations, trends, technologies, and then some. So my name is Nimi Reichenberg. I am the CMO here at Siemplify. If you're not familiar with Siemplify, we are a SOAR vendor. We actually provide the leading independent SOAR platform. If you're not familiar with SOAR, we'll actually discuss that as part of the debate a little in just a few minutes. But for the time being, I think suffice it to say that SOAR stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And it really is technology that helps you build automated workflows or playbooks, automate a lot of the tedious security operations stuff so you can focus on higher value work in your SOC. If you're interested in SOAR or in Siemplify specifically, we've also got a free community edition that you can sign up for on our website. So without further ado, let's start with a tale of the tape, right? We've got on one corner, Carson Zimmerman, a security engineer from Microsoft. Carson, tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and what you expect out of this debate.
Hey folks, can you hear me all right? Sound good? All right. Hey folks, glad to be here today. I've been doing security operations for a very long time, almost as long as Anton, I suppose. Written a book about it, talked about it a bit. Really excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. And in the blue corner, or red if I said blue before, the other color, we've got Anton Chuvakin. Anton, welcome.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. It'll be fun. And
yes.
Frankly, I think of it more like maybe a friendly pillow fight rather than a boxing match, but okay, fine, to each its own.
I agree with you, Anton. Let's see what happens.
Excellent. So before we get started with our first topic, I just want to make sure that feel free to drop in any questions in the chat or in the feed of the event. We'll try to take as many of your questions, comments, suggestions in real time as much as we can. And then, of course, like all good debate, there will be a judge's decision at the end of the debate, and you are the judges. So there is a poll, and at any time, feel free to side with one of our panelists here. We'll have some fun at the end with the results. So, are you ready, gentlemen?
Yay!
Okay, so we're gonna get started. Round one, and we thought we'd tackle this straight on, all this talk that the SOC is dead, right? I mean, there's COVID, we built these, big rooms that, the dark rooms with all these screens, and, that we just don't need for that anymore, right? So, Anton, maybe I'll start with you. What do you think about, this topic of, the SOC is dead? What is SOC in this day and age?
Right, and I usually start this by saying that when you read some of the materials, some of the papers from more enlightened companies, they talk about SOC-less approach and how they don't have SOC, yet they still have good detection and response function. I always kind of smile and say, wait a second, you have a great detection and response function. That's a SOC. To me, SOC is primarily a team. To me, SOC is not a large room full of expensive chairs and smiling, maybe not so smiling analysts. To me, the big room SOC can be dead, maybe dead, I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. To me, SOC as a center of expertise, center of excellence of detection and response, frankly, can never die because we'll still need to do that, right? So that's my dead, not dead, maybe a Schrödinger SOC kind of analogy here.
I think Anton nailed it. I think what's dead is the notion that, 20 years ago when people talked about security operations, to the extent anybody knew what a SOC was, they would always picture a place with a dark room with giant screens with lots of nerds looking at scrolling data. And what's dead is the notion that that's the only way to do it, right? Today, we recognize this cadre of people who are brought together to go find bad stuff in cyberspace. And what we now recognize is that for some organizations, that looks like a bunch of people in a dark room. For some organizations, that looks like some people in a dark room, some people in some back offices, and maybe some people remote. And for other organizations, it may be entirely virtual. And it oftentimes comes down to what are the tendencies of the constituency that the SOC serves? Is that constituency a strongly work remote culture? Or are they a strongly in-office culture? And how has COVID changed that? And we're seeing the pendulum swing hard in the direction of remote work as a result of COVID. And what's going to be interesting over the next couple of years is to see to what extent does that pendulum swing back.
Excellent. So we've already got some questions actually that I was actually thinking about the same thing. So let's talk maybe a little bit about how the pandemic and the fact that to a large extent, the security operations team is fully remote or partially remote, and also to a large extent supporting a workforce that's fully remote or partially remote. What kind of or how does that reality change how security operations teams need to operate these days?
I mean, it's kind of easy to start. I mean, I feel like people who are still attached to SOC as a physical space, like a room or a physical space. To me, if in your head you have the concept of SOC is a physical space, you may be in some distress because of COVID, because you may be kind of agonizing over, I cannot have a SOC, what should I do? Like you're sort of, your plans are kind of ruined. Your plans are ruined by the circumstances, right? But if you never thought that, or you stopped thinking that, and for you, SOC is a team of people who work together in accomplishing the mission of detection and response, then you're actually okay. You are not in a new normal, you're in a normal. SOC was always a virtual team for you, it's a virtual team now. What's new? Nothing. So maybe it's the adaptability again. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Anton, I apologize for interrupting. When I think about work remote for SOC, it's going to be a lot of the same story as any other kind of remote work situation is how are we supporting effective collaboration amongst the folks in near real time? And how are we supporting team cohesion, right? Those of us who have moved between teams during COVID, it's a very different feeling. Right? If you're used to seeing people in person and then not seeing them in person, as much as you're going to see them on the other end of a video chat session on a daily basis, how do you feel them as three-dimensional human beings? And how do we view the work that each other are doing on a routine and three-dimensional basis?
So I completely agree. I think collaboration is one of the things that security operations teams need to rethink. I mean, there's a usual collaboration tools of, yes, let's get people on video conferencing or chats and all of that. But then there is okay, how do I make sure that the security team is also able to collaborate on the actual work that they're doing, right? Somebody discovers IOCs, does an investigation. How does the person that, can't just peek across their shoulder and look at their screen is now able to see that? And, security operations is a very, very collaborative function, right? We'll talk about how you should structure a SOC and tiers or skill sets in just a bit, but I think that is kind of the key. And then even fast forward on collaboration is not just between security analysts anymore. It's with a service provider. It could be with people outside the SOC. So it's even collaboration in the broader sense of the word. I see.
But there's another angle to this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the other angle that I sometimes hear for the SOC is dead story, which I kind of have to maybe put to rest a little bit. Some people say, okay, we had a virtual SOC. We had analysts, we had tiers of analysts, they were virtual. So we are not in the SOC is a room camp. However, we think SOC is a rigid set of tiers of analysts. And now, because of various circumstances that I've covered in several of the papers, that model also cannot work. So people who say we have to get rid of the rigid analysts and models also tend to think that SOC is dead because maybe they have some other approach similar to what we use here at Google and some other companies. But to me, that's still a SOC. It's just a modern SOC organized on different principles. SOC isn't just analysts. There's a lot more to detection engineering, to tools, to intelligence, to research. So to me, if you think of SOC as even a virtual team of 3 tiers of analysts, that vision may also be kind of dying.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anton brought this up. I ran into this issue when I was writing 10 strategies about 7 years ago. Is that when I thought about the audience, I thought, what name most resonates with the audience on this group of people who have been brought together to do all this cyber stuff? And there are many other terms that people have used historically. CSIRT is one of the biggest. And when you say the word SOC, people immediately think a place. And what we want to think about here is a group of people who are specialists, and many different kinds of specialists. It's more of a band or a baseball team than just one expertise who have been brought together to do all of this.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, by the way. Thank you for all the insightful comments, including one that I've been using the wrong mic. So hopefully my audio is coming in better as well. So this is already worth the price of admission. Okay, guys. So I think now that we've covered what SOC even means this day, let's go to round 2. Okay, so at the heart of the SOC, we've got this technology called a SIEM. It's been around for, 25 years, give or take? And depending on what vendor you subscribe to, we may be on next generation SIEM or the next generation of the next generation SIEM, which of course you hear a lot of these talks about, SIEM is dead, right? SOCs don't need a SIEM, or they do need a SIEM, or they can substitute a SIEM with, you can plug in different technologies instead of that. Maybe we'll start with you, Carson. Talk a little bit about, what is SIEM these days? Is it dead? What should you use it for? What should you not use it for? Let's have some fun with this.
It's a great question. This is what I'm super passionate about. When I think about SIEM, let's talk about first about what is SIEM and what do we mean when we say SIEM. When I think about SIEM, I think about a set of technologies and capabilities brought together to collect security relevant telemetry, persist it to support detections and correlations on that, provide a rich analytic framework, including both off-the-shelf detections and the ability to modify those detections or create our own, analytics and ad hoc query, visualizations, all the things necessary to support the alerts that come out of that system, including filtering, enrichment, down selecting, and deduplication. And then finally, the analyst's ability to annotate, disposition, and escalate the alerts that come from that system. So I'm going to come out of the gate in here and say, SOCs need to do this. The question is, what set of technology are they going to use to accomplish that outcome? And you're right, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, for many SOCs, the answer was go buy a SIEM product, implement it, and leverage it. But today, the conversation is more complex, more nuanced, because we have more options.
Anton.
I mean, this is kind of a peculiar case of telepathy, because I am mildly shocked that Carson's definition is like almost perfectly matches my own. I hate to attach SIEM to anything specific to a time. I think of it as a technology, kind of what Carson just said: collect the data, clean it, make it useful for security decisions, alert when needed, use out-of-the-box detection logic, let people customize detection logic. And detection logic, by the way, may mean rules, may mean ML, may mean analytics, may mean, voodoo magic, if you can put it, and if you have a parser for that stuff. But the point is that it's not connected to, SIEM is only rule-based, or SIEM is about compliance. No, SIEM is a set of tech to analyze telemetry, primarily logs, admittedly, but now also other telemetry in furtherance of security outcomes. So to me, this cannot really die. And so to me, for a similar reason that I kind of laugh and cry sometimes about SOC is dead, I also laugh and cry that SIEM is dead, because the need to analyze telemetry in furtherance of security decisions cannot die, detection response decisions. So SIEM in that sense cannot die. We may rename it. I hope my former colleagues at Gartner won't rename it. I know that we resisted pretty heavily, previous week, Gartner, we resisted heavily from inventing things like next-gen antivirus, and some people are still getting grief for inventing the next-gen firewall. But next-gen SIEM is not happening. I can assure you of that. So no 6-letter acronym is a hard rule, but SIEM cannot die simply because the mission is not going to die. But every particular tech, well, may die. Nowadays, some people, like to talk about XDR, and that's one current popular potential SIEM killer. I think that the chance of SIEM eating XDR or merging with XDR is kind of high. I don't think SIEM would die. At the hands of XDR, probably not.
Anton, that's an interesting comment. Let me go out on a limb and talk about what might be dead. One of the original value props of SIEM is that you have the quote unquote single pane of glass. And there's no question that a SIEM product, when properly implemented, will reduce the panes of glass that the analyst has to go to. But what I continually find fault with is the notion you're going to get down to one. What I would rather say is that a SIEM tool is often the focus for the analyst. But what we need to not lose sight of is that it needs to be well integrated with the other tools that are indigenous to that SOC. And that might be different for different folks. It might be a SIEM plus a analytic notebook. It might be a SIEM plus some other ML big data type platform. It might be a SIEM plus
EDR.
Their EDR. Right. But the point is that we need to put together that coherent architecture, right? And both the pivots and the data flows and the escalations and the workflow that support that. So, I've talked about several times, could you compose a SIEM of things that didn't come from a SIEM vendor? Yeah, you could. Could SOAR be part of that? Yeah, you could. I've also seen a lot of people make a lot of hay running, quote, dual stack SIEM, some SIEM product, maybe in the cloud, and then some other log management, big data, maybe some ML stuff going on over here. And sometimes maybe that's a very coherent story put together by the vendor selling some of that.
By the way, I'm going to kind of fake disagree that single pane of glass is dead. And you know why I would fake disagree with that? Because it was never alive. It cannot die. Admittedly, I don't recall a time when we had that.
Yeah, somebody, not original quote, but somebody said, vendors have been promising a single pane of glass and have been better at providing a single glass of pain, right? But there's
single glass of pain, yes, that's right. A little nice whiskey shot of pain.
that are very difficult to integrate right now. It's just painful making all those products integrate, which is part of the reason why we're in business. Before we move on, I do want to ask you guys one more question about SIEM that I don't believe I saw in the audience. If you look at one of certainly the major trends that the SIEM market has witnessed in the past year is the move to the cloud, right? I think every modern SIEM is in the cloud. From our experience, most new SIEM implementations are in the cloud. Would you go out on a limb and say that on-prem SIEM is dead or dying, or do you still see compelling use cases to deploying SIEM on-prem as opposed to in the cloud?
Who goes
so
first?
I'm going to ask you the first question.
One, right? Go.
Let me ask you a question. So when we say cloud SIEM, right, what do we really mean? What I think of it as a sliding scale. A lot of these technologies, even before we use the word cloud to describe someone else's computer, would have some way to integrate data from someone else's computer. We call that thing now the cloud. On the other end of the spectrum you get a PaaS type service where it's prepackaged, you buy certain capacity, you send it data and away you go. And in the middle is this kind of sliding scale of using technologies to achieve the same outcome. Are you implementing your SIEM as an IaaS capability? If you're buying a PaaS capability, is it really PaaS? Or are you just buying some VM templates that have been composed for you? And congratulations, you still need to do the same thing you did on-prem, except it's in a cloud provider now. And really, how comfortable are you as a SOC and as your constituency and sending your data to the cloud provider, and what guarantees are they making? So number one, I see it as a sliding scale, right? And the question is, how are we blending those techniques together?
I'd kind of be in partial agreement at best, because to me it's a sliding scale, but there's a chasm in one place. It's kind of like here or not here. Like at some point if you're doing hybrid, you still have components that are not in your control, not in your physical data center, not in your rented data center. So to me, there is, I don't think it's truly a continuous scale though, because there is a chance that some people really want the server to hug the servers. They want appliances in their data center. We may laugh, you being, from Microsoft cloud provider, me being from Google, the cloud provider, we may laugh at people who insist on physical servers in their data center, but there are many of those people, and there still are. So I'm a little nervous to say on-prem SIEM is dead. Long term, I absolutely believe on-prem SIEM is dead. It's going to be gone. But I am also nervous that the path to that will be quite painful, and there are discontinuities in that path, because there are some people, look at Europe, sometimes people just say, no, we would not use cloud built by a company not in Europe. And guess which companies in Europe have cloud? None. So their choice is data centers. I don't know. I'm afraid that in 2026 rematch that we will have, the same question would come up, and we'd be like, Carson, remember we predicted that on-prem SIEM would die? 5 years have passed. People still use appliances for SIEM sometimes. This is the sad thought I'm having.
Yeah, and the question is, what's left? What if there are situations where you need to bring together a bunch of data in a way that you simply can't send it to the cloud? Forget about geo sovereignty and all of those pieces. Like, there's simply not the bandwidth, right? We want to think about that, and we want to think about things like federated query and geosharding, regardless of whether it's in the cloud or on-prem or what have you. And what are the frameworks we can put together for that? And how are we trying to get through the limitations of those situations that they induce? So those are some of the pieces that I think about.
True. So I want to watch. I like the federated model. I've seen some vendors try for this, but ultimately you are still compromised into a pre-cloud world. Another possible thought here is that, to me, the on-prem SIEM would truly be dead when the effectiveness, efficiency, just results from cloud SIEM would be so superior that it would be like using a spaceship versus a horse and buggy. Like, when cloud would deliver on the analytics advantages, cloud would deliver on shared data analysis advantages, cloud would deliver on TI advantages that are of the scale that would just dwarf the effectiveness. So ultimately, if you use an on-prem SIEM, you're going to fail to monitor your environment. Like, I expect this to happen in SIEM.
Anton's right. And it may get to the point where between on-prem SIEM or cloud in your data center. Hey, here's a rack of a given cloud provider in your data center. We want to think about, what are the capabilities and limitations of that scenario? And in some cases, you may only need, this little bit of SIEM. Sometimes, you need the full stack. So those are some of the things I think about. I would also point out, what is really dead? I still have LPs and a record player. I haven't pulled them out of the closet in several years. But if you look at, people are still buying records. So are LPs truly dead? Or are they just simply kind of relegated to this very small set of use cases? That's one of the things I think about here.
People buy mainframes. Actually, funny enough, this was my lesson after being at Gartner for 8 years, is that in IT, inertia is a really powerful force. And almost every technology we have is still there. People still joke on Twitter about how they use Windows XP in retail, how they use Windows XP in some control systems. So in that sense, vendors like to talk about dead. Occasionally analysts like to talk about dead, but end users, to me, occasionally are stuck with the 1980s tech in 2020s. What is it, 40 years?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I apologize for a Windows XP joke. I should have used Red Hat 5 instead, but they use very outdated systems.
Yeah, let's be clear. When you say Red Hat 5, you don't mean RHEL. You mean actual Red Hat 5.
Yes, correct. That's exactly right. Yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on to the next round. Okay, this is a fun one, right? So, I think nobody would argue that EDR is certainly gaining traction and market share. I mean, we touched a little bit on XDR. Note to the audience, we're not going to touch on XDR a lot because it is so loosely defined and so confusing with a lot of different definitions. We didn't feel people would actually walk out wiser if we, kind of entered that hornet's nest. But there is a lot of talk. Well, EDR is killing NDR, right? With all this endpoint telemetry, do you really need network monitoring, right? And I know you guys are passionate about this topic, so Anton, why don't I let you start?
So this is really a fun one, and I kind of like to point to a very peaceful solution of this by pointing out to my triangle of visibility, where I have the endpoint, network, and logs as kind of a 3 key visibility methods. But at the same time, it's very clear that the priorities have changed. If I recall my early Gartner days, 2013, 14 maybe, when people would really hate to deploy agents and they would fight tooth and nail, they would say, one person told me in regards to endpoint DLP that he'd rather have data center be destroyed by a tsunami than deployed agent DLP. But EDR, early EDRs faced the same challenges. They crashed systems, they blue screened, they caused kernel panics, and they caused other problems. So to me, the endpoint focused approach was very much hated in the early years, but ultimately it won over. People built better agents delivered better value, networks at the same time got encrypted, got increased bandwidth. So to me, the rebalancing, the tide of EDR and the endpoint approach was kind of pushing the network into an auxiliary role. To me, it has not killed it, and I do not think it would kill it, but I think we've been witnessing the pendulum still swing from endpoint to network. But ultimately, there's a risk that both would implode and logs would win. Hey.
And Tom, there's a couple interesting points you made there that I want to talk about. Let me first mention, when I wrote 10 strategies, there was at the time we had a big emphasis on network sensing first because it was easier to describe. And it was easier to describe in the context of what is all this IDS stuff, and the term IDS is so old at this point. And I agree with you completely. The pendulum has shifted. You think back to old SANS classes from way back in the day. It was this huge emphasis on PCAP collection and snort, and God knows I spent hours and hours and hours in front of snort. And I still use snort as an example to talk about some of the issues that we face here. So when I think about why do we still run network sensors? I think about, do you have protocols that you expect to decode and protect that are transiting the network? Do you expect to have major choke points on your network where a network sensor is going to make a lot of sense? Are you in a situation where the owners of the assets that you need to defend are still strongly resistant to installing agents on them, or is it not even a possibility? Particularly in a non-Windows, non-Mac OS, non-Linux type situation. With that said, you made a very interesting comment about logs winning out, particularly as we move to cloud services where all we've got are the logs and there's no network to put a sensor on, or if it is, it's kind of meaningless. And the hosts that we would put a sensor on are not managed by the constituency that the SOC serves. So those are some of the pieces that I think about. The other piece that, Anton, I don't think I heard you mention is this kind of convergence of, next gen firewalls, all in one, protection devices. Is that before the SOC would have these fleets of sensors they themselves operated. And today it's, to a certain extent, it's been commoditized in next gen firewalls. On the other hand, there are still plenty of vendors that are doing amazing things, selling pure play network sensing solutions, both on-prem and in the cloud. I'm not going to mention names. They're out there. And in some cases, I've seen them do really impressive things just in the last year or two.
I think that the concluding remark to this, which sort of like draws a line under this, that I I won't be surprised that the medium-term future would have both of these technologies die because of the microservices, containers, SaaS growing even bigger, and the traditional server-based, VM-based computing to declining. I don't think they would truly die, but I think that the chance of them both being pushed into the niche status and the logs, and of course this new observability movement would get adopted for security. So my suspicion is that the victory of EDR over NDR, we can proclaim that victory, is kind of temporary because EDR itself is endangered from not having a machine to put an agent on. So to me, I'm kind of like confirming, but also kind of like drawing that line that they both should fear the logs, observability, microservices, containers future.
Yeah, and I would, there's another point I'd make here, Anton. First of all, we're always going to have, things we ourselves have. The question is, how fewer servers are we running ourselves, right? On-prem or IaaS. The one other thing I would point out is we need to think about what's our strategy in terms of that EDR getting turned off by the adversary, or that network sensor being circumvented. And that's another major reason why we want to think about a composite sensing scenario, and why in a lot of situations, you can say, well, I've got this really amazing EDR. Great. What happens when a high tier adversary circumvents it, right? What do you have to fall back on? That's maybe not on the host. So think about it.
And one of the great comments in the chat was also, what if the adversary wants to persist on a device that you can't put an agent on, right? Like, I don't know, a printer or something. What happens then, right? So
exactly, and that has happened to people. That has happened in real life, like routers, router backdoors, router inserts, all the fun stuff has happened. Right.
So in that case, ADR won't save you. And yes, and I think, by the way, I think you touched on it, Carson, as well. I think one of the trends that I think brought EDR to the stature that it is today was cloud, right? We don't have that network choke point that makes it ideal for NDR, right? It's hard to monitor traffic in the same way that we do for our own networks. Do you guys maybe have some examples of what other companies are doing? I've seen, again, just the great conversation here in the chat, but people say, well, VPC mirroring is kind of like NDR. How do you see companies monitoring the network in a cloud environment where you can't put that inline sensor? Any examples?
I can tell you one thing. Anton, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Sorry. Let me start with saying that this is actually a really good question that I've struggled to answer back in my Gartner days. I wanted to conclusively state which of the two technologies has a higher chance of surviving in the cloud, and we sort of left it undecided at the end of my Gartner tenure. So to me, this is a tough one because I see people deploy agents on virtual machines in the cloud, and I see people do packet sniffing in clouds. But what if they're both ultimately wrong? And the right answer is in-app telemetry. That will happen later. So I don't know. To me, the short-term answer and the long-term answer may be very different. Today, I see people instrument servers in the cloud with EDR, and they sniff traffic, and they're okay. But they are copying their on-premise mentality to the cloud, and they're mostly okay with that. But as they journey deeper in the cloud, I fear that both of these technologies would kind of have to go, and we would use more in-app telemetry.
Anton's absolutely right about the in-app telemetry. I think when I think about network sensing in the cloud, I think about a couple pieces. Number one is there's something that the cloud provider is doing that allows you to very easily bake in some kind of network sensing capability at the network layer. For example, if I have a virtual network, is there a cloud native feature that allows me to emit NetFlow like telemetry? And how easy is the integration with some kind of cloud-based appliance? The other thing I think about is the complication around costing. In the olden days where we were only thinking about on-prem, the costing of buying and refreshing those network sensors was straightforward, and oftentimes the SOC would shoulder the burden. The issue is in the cloud is if you've got a service owner, an application or what have you, who owns this set of stuff in the cloud, is there an easy mechanism for them to place the cost of that virtual network appliance over to the SOC that's clean? And that's one of the questions people might ask. Or is the SOC going to say, congratulations, you're in the cloud, you must now pay the tax of playing this virtual device per our specifications in your places, and guess what, you're going to pay for it. And it's just a conversation. I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do it. I'm just saying, it's worth planning out.
Yes, I fear that the aspect of money changing hands in some complicated ways, if you have to sniff high volume of traffic in the cloud, may come up. I'm nervous. I've heard about some cases involving our cloud when people said, yeah, we want to sniff all traffic in this way, and we were like, sure, and here's the bill, and they're like, So the result is that it sometimes it helps to be more cloud native, to align things and to build things in a way that allows you to scale not just physically, but also economically. And to me, the economic scaling angle is tricky in this case. It is absolutely tricky. I've seen people really fall into the trap here.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to the next round, which is an interesting one. So we hear a lot of talk about, how should a SOC be structured these days? And, for sensationalism's sake, of course, there's all this tier one is dead. There's no such thing as tier one anymore. The classic model of the SOC is dead. But if you try to be maybe a little less sensationalist, we got some feedback from the crowd that there's too much violence in our headlines here. Maybe I'll rephrase this and start with Carson. How do you think SOCs and security operations teams, since we established that a SOC is really a function and not a location, how should you structure your security operations team these days? What's changed and what's really staying the same?
Well, it's interesting. When I wrote 10 strategies, it was very easy to talk around this, because at the time we'd say, well, we'll just say tier one to refer to the people doing alert triage. And today, that's not as absolute. And I've run into folks who bristle at the notion of calling the folks who do alert triage and initial investigation, or who pick up the phone or answer the emails that come to the SOC as a front door function, quote unquote, tier one. One of the other things that we want to think about is how many tier one people do we need to accomplish those outcomes as a proportion of the overall SOC function. And surprise, I'm working with MITRE to write the second edition of my book. We're actually pretty far along. And this is one of the conversations we had was, do we still call them tier one? Do we even use that terminology? And how inclusive of those other models are we in our language? There are some organizations that rotate people into that tier one function. And there's a big, long conversation about how do we do this? How do we support young and junior members of the staff who we need to orient them on this, on how to do SOC effectively, but put them in a way that both they can be a team member, but not jeopardize more advanced functions. Historically, that's tier one. So my question to a lot of folks is, if we don't have a quote unquote permanent tier one function, how are we going to accomplish that outcome?
True, and this to me is kind of one of those tricky ones, because there's a lot of hype I hear from people who say, oh, we'll just automate tier one. We're just going to buy a tool from, NIMI, from Siemplify, and this tool will just like magically do the work of tier ones. And, I don't want to laugh at this, because conceptually, the strategy does have merit. If some more intelligent people write playbooks for the initial triage, then initial triage task is supposed to be done by the machine, and then the humans do further triage. Again, conceptually, it works. But here's one problem. Where do you get more senior people if you never grow them from more junior people, because you never had junior people? That's a great career progression question. So if you assume you have tier 2 and 3, where do you get the tier 2s? Okay, you hire them from outside. Well, if everybody else does the same, where do more junior people come from? How do you start? so that to me is kind of an interesting career progression question, because it's not about can we automate tier one in some practical manner. Frankly, not exactly. I'd rather break the model altogether. But it's a question of where do you get better talent if you never grow it. So to me, that's one side angle I want to touch. Now, tiering is dead is another angle that I've encountered late in my Gartner years and definitely in my current Google years, where I've seen people organize SOCs on a skill set model and not a tier seniority model, where they say, okay, I'm an early triage specialist. You are the confirmation or like a alert investigation specialist, and I am the IR guy. And we are both of some level of seniority, and all three of us have skills. So my skill is to look at the vast volume of data, write some code, write some scripts, write some tools, and then figure out what stuff means. I'm not junior. I am in the funnel at the early stage, but my skill set is identify signal in a lot of noise. So to me, this is not tier one. This is early triage skill set. And SOCs that are organized that way achieve good results, occasionally at higher cost. So that's one example that I've seen that kind of breaks the tiers and makes them into skills. I've seen people who approach it with the whole detection engineering, detection as code approach, where people who write detection logic then have to pursue alerts. So detection engineers are sort of do the tier one job, but they try to automate as much of it because ultimately they're on the hook for it. That's another way to kind of put tier one to rest. So to me, the dead here is a little harsh. It's not about dying, but it's about, can a funnel 3-tier SOC survive the future onslaught of events? To me, the answer is no. I don't think we can hire enough people to funnel through the old model. We have to change the model.
Yeah, there's no question that better alert deduplication, enrichment, funneling, filtering, ML, using the alert dispositioning in a supervised model. These are all opportunities to decrease the number of people that are doing this alert triage function, regardless of what we call it. I completely agree with what Anton said, particularly about building that funnel, and not just in terms of alerts, but in terms of people. We think about filter versus funnel in terms of our hiring model. We also think about kind of that DevOps mentality, giving every member of the SOC, regardless of their role, the opportunity and ability to make their lives better. And this is one of the reasons why I really like to see situations where people who are doing alert triage and investigation have an opportunity to impact the detections that are being written. And that might be through the detection process. Maybe you're using Agile Scrum or something that looks and smells a lot like it. Maybe they're and they participate. Maybe there's a board. Maybe they actually do the coding themselves. There's all kinds of approaches here. One of the other things we want to think about in all of this is the language that we're using, and using more inclusive language. Oh, you're just a tier one person, right? I've heard tier 3 analysts weaponize this kind of placement, and it stinks. And we need to think about using more inclusive language to make sure that everyone in the SOC feels valued, because they are.
I'll say two things about that. One is, from our experience working with a lot of security operations teams. One is, this pandemic has brought opportunities and threats to the profession. I mean, the obvious opportunity is that as organizations are more accommodating of remote work, you can hire analysts and security operations people anywhere, right? And in whatever, two years ago, if you had a SOC in a certain location and you limited your hiring to that location, it was tough, right? And it's still tough. We all know there's a huge skill shortage in cybersecurity, but the ability to hire anywhere is certainly an opportunity. On the flip side, I'm sure we've all came across the Great Resignation term that was coined. I think people today are just less accepting of jobs that are tedious and suck, quite honestly. And then that the turnover, if you give your tier one very repetitive routine work, you run the risk. I mean, turnover has always been notoriously high, but I think these days even higher, right? So I think to Anton's point, you have to find a job that's both applicable to junior people, because everybody wants, and I saw that in the comments to to the stream as well. Everybody wants people with 10 years of experience, right? And that's what everybody's posting jobs for. And we know there's a shortage, and we know, yes, cybersecurity is people increasingly view it as a worthy profession, and more people are, going and taking cybersecurity classes in school. But last time I checked, to become a security professional with 10 years of experience takes 10 years, right? I mean, there's no
roughly about that much,
right? So, yes, all these kids are coming out of school and they're going to learn the ropes, but it's going to take them 10 years to have 10 years of experience. So, yes, you have to find out. I think you have to figure out a way to hire junior people, give them the experience, turn them into senior people, but make that job interesting enough so they don't, quit after 2 months. And I think that's the challenge. The good news, you can hire them anywhere in the country, sometimes anywhere in the world, so you can certainly tap a larger pool of applicants.
Nimi, there's one other point I'll make here, and that is around team cohesion, and it goes back to what we discussed in round one. It goes to subjects of outsourcing and whatnot. Is that when I think about how I structure the SOC, no matter what, I want to think about building a coherent team that has line of sight to each other and that can have that feedback loop. What we don't want to do is build up walls between the different components of the SOC, regardless of the organizational model or geography that we pursue.
Right. And while that's come just about junior people, and I also see that, at Siemplify and at other companies, the people calling the shots are for the most part senior and experienced people, right? Like all three of us have been in cybersecurity 20 plus years, and we have the experience, and we can even work remotely and be productive. It's easy to forget what life was like when we were just starting out, right? How much we needed that mentorship, that guidance, right? Learning on the job, learning from people. And I think people who are more junior and are maybe starting like fully remote, it's very tough, right? I think for them, and then the organization has to come up with the ways of, getting in that mentorship, coming in, learning on the job, learning from other people. Because if you take, again, somebody that's, in their 20s, a few years out of school, you sit them home in front of inside a Zoom all day and saying, okay, that's how they will get the experience and become a professional. That is just a very tall order, right? So I think it's, the senior people who have to remember what it was, what being you was, and the type of mentorship that you need to become a skilled senior person in your profession.
We're done.
All right, we are starting the last round. And speaking of humans, etc., right? Humans are dead. So other than the bold prediction that every human on this planet will be dead at some point, I think that's a very plausible prediction. But other than that, in the context of security operations, right? There's a lot of talks. Well, talk about SOAR and machine learning, right? And then there's like, security is going to become a battle of our AI versus the bad guy's AI, right? Our robots will fight their robots, and whoever has the better robot will win. And we're all going to be redundant. So talk again a little bit about, and there's no doubt that machine learning is out there, AI is out there. Things are becoming smarter, but maybe talk a little bit about what is the role of humans today, where you see it in a few years from now. Maybe I'll start with you, Carson.
Well, there's a bunch of pieces here, and we've talked about some of them already. I'll go back to an old analogy I use with Snort. One of the reasons why so many people like Snort for so long is that when you were running Snort properly, you could get the alert, the PCAP that went with the alert, and then you could see the signature that caused the alert to fire. And that gave the analyst a great deal of transparency. And thus trust in what they were looking at. So whenever we talk about ML or anything like that, AI, use your favorite buzzword to talk about complex math and statistics implemented by computers to help us reason through and have better detections about data. We think about, at least one of the factors is, what are we doing to support that level of confidence and trust in the analysts that are looking at that telemetry that's coming out of it. And there's different techniques here. Part of it is simply learning some of those techniques yourself as the analyst. One of them is providing avenues for democratizing the ML that sits inside of that through SIEMs, through cloud-based SIEMs, et cetera. So those are some of the things that I think about here. Are humans dead? No. What I think is the case, however, is that the proportion of humans to terabytes of data continues to slide in the direction of more terabytes and fewer humans.
Yes, so I want to start with kind of course, agreeing with Carson, because these are sort of like things that you learn once you stewed in this soup for a good number of years. You sort of get to the same conclusions wherever you work. But to me, there's one tricky angle to this. So of course, there would be more data, more threats, more complicated environments, but we'll have more automation to help the humans augment their skills, blah, blah, blah. This is traditional thinking today, and to me, this is very much what I would agree with. I am sometimes nervous. And again, those of you who read my blog post that's titled, "Stop Trying to Take Humans Out of SOC, Except Wait, Wait, Wait." That's an actual title. So I tried in that post, I tried to kind of summarize some of the conventional wisdom that we have now, that no, full automation is impossible, it's an unworthy goal, won't happen, blah, blah, blah. But there are some scenarios where I am nervous about humans handling it well. And so I am almost like, I sometimes joke that I am a short-term ML AI skeptic, but I'm a long-term, maybe very long-term AI ML optimist, or ML AI fan, because I do see situations where you do need to respond with faster than human times. And we know that we cannot hire our way to solving problems. So it's almost like the staff to secure grows like this, the number of people grows like this. So we do need to have the robot per human ratio grow, but that still doesn't mean humans are dead. It just means one human sort of handles a gigabyte of data today and a terabyte of data tomorrow and a petabyte of data in 10 years. That part is in a short path. But what about the types of threats where you sort of have to fight them with machines only? I don't know. I'm nervous to make predictions like this, but think about the worms, like the classic 2003 threat. You sort of don't go and hunt for that. You kind of have to react immediately. So I don't really know if somebody uses top-tier offensive tech today and creates a really good worm. We're not going to hunt our way to success here. We're not going to human our way to success. We kind of have to fight it with machines. And that's why I'm kind of like, give a slight hesitation to the future predictions about humans in the SOC, because, you know, sometimes we just need the speed that humans cannot deliver. I don't know. I'm lost about this. And again, if you read the blog post, you see that I have no conclusion. I'm like, I don't know. In 10 years, ask me again.
It's an interesting statement, Anton. I would kind of abstract that out myself and say, you have a bucket of problems that we feel good about computers solving, and we have a bucket of problems we feel good about, humans solving it, and things shift from one bucket to the other. But, one of the issues for a lot of organizations has been having the right investments and setting the right factors for success to make all of that ML or automation work, right? This was the reason why so many SIEM vendors lost contracts and lost bids when they were the incumbents, especially in the early 2000s, right? So the question is how are the folks selling the SOAR, ML, SIEM, big data, et cetera, platforms enabling their customers to achieve the success shown in the wonderful demos at sales time? That's one of the things I think about here.
Yes, and I think that's probably a good conclusion to the debate. I guess I'm going to watch with one eye for situations where we assume we're going to solve the problem with humans, but the attackers would push us out of that and say, hey guys, you're solving this problem with humans, but we won't let you. And then we are kind of out of luck. That's my nervousness, that there's some stuff that's misbucketed, or attackers make us misbucket stuff between this is for humans, this is for machines to solve. Again, more of a longer term concern.
Excellent. By the way, some really fun comments here. By the way, I think somebody was starting to wonder, Anton, if you're really just an AI Terminator sent from the future to kill Sim, SOC, and Sarah Connor. I don't know if you can comment on that or not.
Phenomenal.
So, by the way, this debate is recorded. For those of you who, I may want to rewatch it or send it over, I'm hoping that all the comments are show up in the recording as well, because there's some really insightful, not just funny, but really insightful discussions in the comments. So unfortunately, guys, I think that was the last spell, and we have reached the end of our debate. If I look at the decision, at the judge's decision, it looks like Carson Zimmerman wins by a very narrow judge's decision as to
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I yield.
You know what this means, right? You know what this means. You know what this means.
He gets the more expensive swag. I get the mug.
We get to do this again. That's what it means.
No, really? Okay.
And I'll share with the audience, when we were kind of planning out the topics that we're going to talk. We have a long list of topics that we didn't get to. For example, what should I insource? What should I outsource? Should I send all my data to a single data lake? And loads of I think very relevant topics that we knew we're just not going to have time for. So maybe a rematch is in the cards. If it is, we'll certainly keep everybody posted. I did paste here two interesting resources that kind of speak to security operations. If you're interested in downloading them, you can just Google them and either look for autonomic security operations, which is something that Anton wrote as part of his work at Google. And we at Siemplify recently released something we call the Blueprint of Modern Security Operations, with a lot of great insights as well. Carson, I know you mentioned the book that you're writing with MITRE. I don't know when that's out, if you want to give people an idea of when they can read that.
Sure thing. So, 10 Strategies has been around since about 2014. It's been free. I'm working with a couple other folks at MITRE on the second edition of that work. We're pretty far along in that. We're looking at maybe later this year. We don't have a specific date. Heck, we haven't even finalized on a final title, but I would bet that this one will go to 11. So we're super excited about getting out there. We're super excited about covering a lot of new tech. And we're super excited about that book, just like the first edition, also being available for everyone for free.
Excellent. So with that, I wanna thank you both. And again, hopefully we can organize some sort of rematch in the near future. But in the meantime, the security operations function will continue with full force. Carson, Anton, thank you both again.
Thank you very much. This was fun.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure.